You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 228. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Are you ready to talk about taking ownership of your practice? I am, and I hope you are too. I'm excited that you're joining me here this week. Welcome back if you're a return listener. Today's episode is one I'm really excited to share with you because it's a topic that I find I eventually speak with most of my coaching clients. The conversation usually looks something like this. Maybe it's one of our initial calls, or maybe it's a few calls into our relationship. And I might say something like, hey, have I ever told you about my 3 buckets approach to legal practice? And they'll say, no, I haven't. What's that? And I'll dive into an explanation, which I'm about to share with you, about the 3 essential ingredients of any legal practice. Now, before I dive into what those 3 essential elements are, I'd like to provide a little bit of context because you might wonder if this is something that would be helpful for you, or if it's something that would be helpful for somebody in your organization. So taking ownership, that expression is something you might hear as a junior lawyer. We talk about students who join a law firm and are told that they need to go from having a student mindset to having a lawyer mindset or an owner's mindset. And that can often be confusing to somebody who has no idea what that even means. And at a later stage in your practice too, this idea of taking ownership can mean that you're an associate who's been practicing for a few years and you're increasingly wanting a leadership role, which requires taking more ownership over your practice, or you're already in leadership and you're trying to find ways to elevate your practice, whether it's a greater leadership role or you just want to refine your practice. You want to make it better. You want to like it more. You want to focus more on a certain type of work. Or you're helping other lawyers. Maybe you're senior and you're thinking about how to mentor junior lawyers. I'd recommend this podcast episode because what I'm sharing is a framework that applies at essentially any level of practice. The way you use it might be different depending on whether you're a very junior lawyer or a more senior lawyer. But the idea is to have 3 pillars, 3 buckets, 3 easy measurements, almost like a checklist that you can turn to assess where you're at, almost like a self-audit. Am I where I want to be? If something feels off in your practice, it's a really good way to check in and say, what's going on here? What am I missing? And if you're trying to plan proactively, you've got goals for your practice, you want things to look a certain way, this is a great way for you to have a very simple framework that you can turn back to do that self-audit. Am I where I want to be? And if not, which of these factors is not working? So I'm going to dive into the 3 buckets. And as I go through each of these buckets, I would invite you to think about where you're at in your practice and how this is relevant to you and how this will help you take ownership of your practice at whatever stage you're at. So without further ado, the 3 buckets are as follows. And I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I'll tell you what I mean by each of them. The first is skills, the second is people, and the third is time. So skills, people, time. If you can keep those things in the back of your mind, you will always have this to turn back to. Now, for those of you who work in law firms or other organizations where there's a checklist in place, there's maybe a roadmap for lawyer success, that's great. You have got already a number of criteria that you can look to establish whether you are on track. And I say on track in the sense of on track in relation to those criteria. Now, this can also be a useful tool in relation to performance reviews. So depending on your organization, you may or may not have a formal review process. And if you do, then chances are you're being evaluated on certain factors. It might be that there are checklist items when it comes to business development or skills that you're looking to develop, or maybe how is your time and practice management? How are you to work with? So there's likely going to be a number of different categories on which you're being evaluated. And what I'd encourage you to think about is how can you take what is given to you objectively by your firm? And typically this is in a law firm. There are other places that this would be relevant, this idea of having your three buckets, of taking ownership of your practice. I think it applies, frankly, to any business. So these concepts are not unique to lawyers, but the way I'm talking about them today is in relation to lawyers. And really who I have in mind is a lawyer in private practice, whether you're at a law firm, whether you have your own firm. This is how to think about your practice in a way that you're taking ownership. You're treating it like a business, like a thing that you own, and using this framework to help you in that capacity. So what I'm mentioning here, the point I'm trying to make is this is a checklist. It's 3 simple items. Everyone can remember 3 things: skills, people, time. And yes, you can use this the way that I'm going to be talking about it today. And if you've got other criteria that are provided to you from some other source, I'm encouraging you to think about how these go together, right? And what I suspect is that if you have a list of criteria, chances are you can see how each of those falls into one of these 3 categories. So that simplifies the exercise for you, right? When you're thinking about your practice, maybe there's 12 different items, but you can think about them in these 3 discrete categories. So that's what I'm proposing to you. That's the focus of today's discussion. So that first bucket, let's think about skills. Now, as a lawyer, the skills that you bring are very likely the same things that you are billing your time for. In private practice, typically you're on a billable hour model. Not always. You might be on a fixed fee or a contingency or some other way of billing or charging for your time. But for many lawyers in private practice, you are recording a unit of time, and that unit of time reflects a unit of value that is being delivered to a client. So if you think about the things that you write onto your time entries, what are those things? Because chances are that's going to give you some pretty good clues as to what skills, what legal skills you are bringing to the table that you are getting paid for. So what are those skills for you? Well, if you're starting out, you might be thinking about maybe it's research, maybe it's contract review, maybe it's assisting on a trial, maybe it's whatever it happens to be, drafting. As your practice evolves, your skill level will evolve too. So you may continue to do these things and you may add to those skills. Maybe you're taking more of a lead role in negotiating a contract or conducting the discovery instead of helping someone else prepare for the discovery. So your role within the firm, within your organization is going to evolve. And so the skills that you are billing for, the skills that you want to develop are going to evolve over time. So as you're reflecting on your practice and you're taking ownership of your practice, the first category I'd invite you to think about is your skills category. Are you where you want to be? Are there skills that you are really good at that you want to get even better at? Are there skills that you're really good at where you think this is a skill that I no longer need to work on? This is something I've mastered and it's actually time for me to delegate that skill to somebody else because there's another skill that you want to move on to. Skills might also be in relation to certain practice areas. So if you're in practice area A and what you really want is to move your career in the direction of practice area B, then you might be thinking about what kind of projects, what kind of work you can take on to move into that other category of skill. So the whole taking ownership concept and applying it to your skills is about you being the master behind where you take your skills. Now, in private practice, yes, you are kind of at, I don't want to say the mercy because that sounds really like you don't have any control, but really you are in response, perhaps is a good word, to what is being requested in the market. You need a market, and we'll get to that next, for the work that you ultimately provide. And so your skills in many ways will be a reflection of the kind of work that is coming in through the door. And that isn't always very predictable. There are lawyers today whose practice areas are built on things that happened during the pandemic, an unpredictable event that led to this whole series of rules and laws or whatever it is that came in, problems that came in that are now being litigated. When I first started practicing as a lawyer, one of the areas of practice was leaky condo litigation. That was huge in Vancouver. And I started out in an insurance defense firm where leaky condos were a huge thing. That ultimately wrapped up. That nature of practice is not today. I don't practice in that area anymore, so I don't know what the status is. But at the time I started practicing, that practice area was already on the decline, whereas a few years previously, it had been a huge practice area. So it's cyclical. It depends on what's happening. So you'll notice things like, I don't know, cryptocurrency and all these other things that came into play after I stopped practicing. So I see people in these brand new practice areas. That's informed by what's happening in the world. That's influencing your practice and the skills that you're developing. So the point here, when you're taking ownership, is yes, the skills that you develop will be in response to what comes through the door. And what I'm also offering is that in the quest of taking ownership, your job becomes to become really proactive about the skills that you want to develop and setting yourself some goals and then being proactive about going and seeking that type of work. So that is bucket number one, is what are the skills you have and what are the skills that you want to develop? Now, before we move on to the next category, I would love to share with you something I also share with clients that I work with in terms of how to approach your skill development. One of the things that I see as a trap for a lot of lawyers is getting really good at the skill of being the person that is 24/7. When there's a really terrible problem and it's last minute, you're the person people come to help them fix it. Now, that may be the role that you want to play. And if that is the case, then by all means, go ahead and fill that role and be that person. You will have people who love you for that. I see it, and so I believe it, and that might work really well for you. But the problem with that is that it develops a value proposition that requires you to be the person that is there, that gets the request last minute for the really thorny problem. And so you might find that disproportionately you're dealing with these things. And when you start perhaps reaching a phase of life where you no longer want that, so where I see this most is super junior lawyers who are totally fine with dropping everything to respond to whatever it is, that works until you reach a point in your life where maybe you have a family, you start having kids, or you start deciding you want a bit more balance in your life for whatever reason, you want a few more boundaries. It can be really hard to extract yourself from that persona if that is the value proposition that you have created for yourself. So the way to proactively deal with that is to become someone who can provide skills, who can provide value that isn't measured based on your ability or availability to solve these last minute problems that nobody else wants to deal with. The trick here is to find the skills that are super highly valued, that are perhaps specialized, so that people are keen to come to you and they are willing to work on your terms. Now, I get it. This is going to work better in some environments than others. If you're in an environment where the culture is to do all things at all times, and that runs throughout the firm, for example, and that is the culture and that is the expectation, then maybe the strategy will not be as effective as, say, you are a sole practitioner with a really niche practice where you have a lot more control over the files you take on and how you work. But the principle is the same. You want to be the person who has these really specialized skills so that people come to you because they know that you are the person to solve their problem. So an analogy I like to use is the idea of the 24/7, the 7-Eleven, where it's a convenience store. You can go there any time of day And chances are you can get what you need. Maybe you would like to have a sandwich and they're going to have something there. It'll be wrapped in cellophane. It's probably been sitting there for 3 weeks. But if you're starving and that's your only option, that might be what you choose. It's this model of I'm available, I can do it, and I can do anything, I can do everything. And it's like, that is the image that comes to mind. Now, I hope that's not offending anybody because that's certainly not my intent. I'm simply trying to draw a mental image so that you can see where I'm going with this message. So the opposite to that, or a different idea of value, would be to become that person who delivers the service that is so specialized and so good and so unique that people are willing to wait. And there's this really beautiful bakery near my house that I go to sometimes, and I'm always reminded of how much I love the level of attention and detail and care that goes into that specific bakery. It's a beautiful location. It's a beautiful shop. The decor is done a very certain way. The pastries are done a certain way. There's these fine chocolates. The service is exceptional. And they're closed on Sundays and Mondays. I know that if I want a pain au chocolat or I want to sit on their patio, which I love to do, then I need to go there on a day that they're actually open. And I'm willing to wait. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I really need to carve out time on my Saturday because I want to go to that coffee shop this weekend and I can't do it on Sunday. There's that element of scarcity and I'm willing to work around it. So you want to become that person where people are thinking to themselves, okay, well, I probably can't go to this person in the middle of the night to ask them for help with this thing, but I know that when I need an answer to this really tough, complex situation, she's the best person. So what I'm encouraging you to think about when you're developing your skills, when you're in that skills bucket, is not just kind of, okay, what are the skills that I want and where do I want to go in my practice, but what are the skills that you could learn that would really set you apart from others, that would align with your interests, align with your strengths, and make you that version of lawyer that is really sought after. So that's bucket number 1. So before we move on, you might even reflect on where you would rank yourself right now. Where would you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of the skills that you're developing? Are you where you want to be? Are there certain things that you've been avoiding? Certain challenging tasks? Maybe there's areas where right now you're second chair and you're thinking, oh, I really should be doing first chair, but oh, that seems really scary. That seems like a big leap. Maybe you want to take a more leadership role on files, work more closely in the advisory role, but you're reluctant or you don't see the opportunity. Sometimes the opportunity isn't in the place where you are. Some firms may not have the practice area that you want, or they might not be open to letting you build that. So you need to look around and ask yourself, am I where I want to be? Are there skills I should develop? And I use that word sparingly, but if you really want to go in a certain direction, are there things that you need to start doing more of in order to get there? And when you're honest with yourself, what are those things? And then how do you go about getting some more of that experience? So if I look at my own practice, I'm a lawyer who does non-practicing legal related work. I help produce webinars about the law. I coach lawyers. I help with lawyer professional development. I do all of those things. And if I look at my practice over the past few years, there's my coach training, my certification, going up a level in terms of my accreditation with the International Coaching Federation. I've done additional training in areas of ADHD coaching, so that executive functioning coaching. How can I assist lawyers who are really struggling with practice management? What do I need to learn there? I'm constantly learning new information through books and podcasts about better coaching approaches and tools and mechanisms. There's ongoing CPD that I'm engaged in. And I'm also pushing myself to develop skills that are ones that I find challenging. So speaking and public speaking and learning how to present and engage in new and challenging ways. These are things where I am putting myself in situations where I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm putting myself outside of my current comfort zone because it's important for me to develop skills that I think are going to help me do better work where I can influence and help more people and really develop a practice that I feel I want to be that coffee shop. I want to be delivering excellence to my clients because I really want you to succeed. And the better I get at my job, the more I can help you do that. So that's how I look at the skills bucket in my practice. No, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm certainly mindful of the buckets. And that's one that I'm thinking about when I do my check-ins. So that was skills. Now we're moving on to the second bucket. And the second bucket is people. So that's a pretty broad bucket. And you're probably wondering what that means in terms of how do you even consider that and what does that bucket look like? So first and foremost, if we're looking at it from a business perspective, there's this idea that you've got a legal practice and you have skills that you are developing and want to develop further. Ultimately, the way you do that is through work. And where does the work come from? It comes from people. It comes from organizations, which are usually run by people. I don't know of any that aren't. So while you might be instructed by corp, usually it's a human. Maybe it's their counsel, in-house counsel, general counsel, team member. It's an owner. There's somebody there. There's a human that is asking you to help them. And so your client base, the people who have problems, the organizations who have problems, or maybe they're not problems, they're opportunities. I think of problems probably because I'm a former litigator. And so people didn't typically reach out to me because the world was really rosy and they were about to close a deal that would make everybody a fortune. Usually when people reach out to a litigator, it's because something has gone wrong or something looks like it's going to go wrong. And can you please help me figure out what to do with this problem? So maybe that's why I'm kind of starting there. But it could also be that you've got a client who's got a brilliant business opportunity and they need your help to make sure that they stitch that thing together in a way that is sound, where people's interests are protected, the downside is protected, they're doing it in a tax efficient, business efficient manner, all of those things that your beautiful minds turn to as solicitors. So here you are, you're trying to develop these skills and you've got these humans out there who need your help. And the way that the transaction works is that it's built on a relationship. You need to let people know that you can help them. They need to know that you're available. They need to know that they can trust you, that you're going to do your job, that you're competent, that you're willing, that you have the time, that you have the capacity, all of that. And so there needs to be this communication that is going on between you and your client. Now, when you're a super junior lawyer, when you're a student, for example, at a law firm, your first clients are other lawyers. They could be the lawyer who's a second year call. That could be your client. It could be the partner who's running the file. That could be your client. So you're, from the beginning, learning how to serve your clients and ultimately develop a network of people who are going to send you work. So if you're looking at the people bucket, from a commercial standpoint, the first thing you're thinking about is who are your clients, because you need clients in order to have work to build your skills. So, I talk about these buckets as though they're three separate things. They're not. They're all interconnected, and you'll see that, right, as you start going through the different buckets and analyzing your practice. But for simplicity, we want to categorize them so that it's not overwhelming. You're not caught up in the nuances. You're able to do a quick check and say, okay, my skills are good. How are things with the people? So people, first and foremost, from a commercial perspective, is do you have the clients you need? So those could be clients at your firm, as in lawyers at your firm. It could be lawyers in your community who refer work to you. Those are, in an indirect way, your clients. And then finally, the end user clients, the person who ultimately is receiving the legal advice, who is paying your invoice, the client. And you can see how internally your colleagues, the lawyers who give you work, they're paying for your services. You're receiving some form of compensation. And the same is true of your external clients. They are paying you in a more direct way. It's not a paycheck for all the stuff you do. It's individual invoices, often itemized line by line, for the work that you're doing for them. So when it comes to that second category, then the question to ask yourself is, how is your work supply? How are your relationships that are supporting the business that you're running, the practice that you have? So there you can check in with yourself, and maybe you're at a stage where you're thinking about the lawyers that you work with. So are you serving the lawyers at your firm in a way that is productive, that's leading to the type of work that you want? Are they happy with your work? Do you have good relationships with them? How do you engage with them? Are you delivering to them the best service that you possibly can? Are you thinking of ways that you can be helpful, that you can contribute to the overall quality and excellence of the project? Are you thinking proactively about what needs to happen next? So you really want to think about those relationships internally. And of course, as your practice evolves, you're also wanting to think about who else are your clients. As you rise in seniority, you'll have more external clients. If you're a lawyer who's in private practice on your own, you have your own firm or you're in an independent firm, chances are you're very alive to the fact that you need clients to make your business run, right? For me, when I started a coaching practice, that was when I really understood the idea of clients and building a business and having relationships in a way that was never as real before working in a law firm. And it's not that I did not appreciate clients or that I didn't deliver the best service that I was capable of. It's just that I became more aware as an independent practitioner of the relationship between me and the clients who give me work, because you can have all of the skills. As a lawyer, you can have all of the skills. But in order to have a practice that is thriving, you'll need to have those people who can come to you, who know that you can help them, and you can apply those skills in a way that produces outcomes for them. And so when you think about this idea of the relationships, ask yourself, are you cultivating the relationships that you want, that you need, where you are helping them? Ultimately, you are providing a service and you're both happy with that service. They want what you can do for them and you want to do what you can help them with. Now, this is an area where I often see lawyers struggle. So if you're in a law firm, for example, and you find that your market has dried up, that's kind of the terminology that I have heard that I sometimes use. It means that you've lost the flow of work that would come from people within your office. Now, this can just be because of the economy, because of the commercial environment that you're in. Maybe you have a certain type of practice area where all of a sudden the work dried up and there truly is nothing out there. And sometimes the reason that your market dries up is because the relationships you have with your clients, your past clients, potential clients, that relationship breaks down. And so instead of coming to you with their problems, they go to somebody else. And it's a hard but true reality for some lawyers. And what that usually means is either they rebuild the trust, which is or is not possible depending on where they're at, right? Where they're at in terms of their relationships, whether they can repair the relationships that need repairing or form relationships with people who are willing to be their clients, their customers, or it means finding a new environment in which to practice where they're able to start fresh and build solid relationships with people who will give them work. And sometimes it's really just a question of environment. It's a question of fit. I don't love that word, but sometimes the environment that you're in just isn't the right one for you, for them. And by moving somewhere else, you can actually find, wait a minute, there's much more of a synergy between this organization and you. And so it flows a lot more easily. Sometimes not. Sometimes there's other things at play, sometimes practice management, sometimes skill. So if you think about it, if people are not working for you, it may be that the skill level that they require isn't the skill level that you're able to offer. Or it could also be practice management. And we'll get to that in a second. But that's an area where I see lawyers who are really smart, really capable, have the skills, but can really get themselves into trouble because people find that lawyer is really great and they're really smart, but I don't know when I work with them if I'm going to get things back on time. And that creates stress, and I don't want that stress. So I'd rather work with somebody who maybe doesn't have that same level of skill, but I know they're going to be there. I know they're going to show up. So going back to the people thing, it's important to keep tabs on your market. Do you have a sufficient market? And is it the market that you want? And again, that taking ownership is taking responsibility for who it is that is in your client world and cultivating those relationships, being proactive in those relationships. And as you advance in your career, you're wanting to think about who your clients are. Now, the people bucket is not just the people who send you work. It certainly includes them. And for commercial purposes, that is pretty important. Other people who I would include in your people bucket are people that you delegate to, the team that you're building. So again, if you're thinking about your practice over the long term, as you begin at a very early stage, you're probably at the bottom of the totem pole. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that in a factual way. Chances are people are delegating to you, not the other way around. You might delegate to your assistant. There might be some team projects where you're kind of doing a peer delegation type of thing. But really, it's as you elevate in years and as your practice grows, that you're using other people to help you. And I don't mean using in a negative way. I mean, you're delegating, you're sharing responsibility, you're handing over the power, whatever you want to call it, but you're relying on other people to help you with your work. So at the beginning, chances are other people are relying on you. You may have less control over your practice, less control over your time. But as you evolve, as your practice grows, you are now cultivating relationships with other people within your organization and even outside of your organization who are supporting you and helping you grow. So talking about the connection between some of the buckets, you can see how, for example, if you start out and your skills are those of a junior lawyer, let's say it's reviewing documents or being the person who makes sure that the closing books are done or some other task that is typically assigned to a more junior lawyer relative to a more senior lawyer. Once you've done your share, we'll call it, of junior work, what you might find is you elevate to more of a project manager role within that project. And so instead of doing that work yourself, that skill set that you already have, you're delegating it. You're overseeing, you're helping other people who are more junior than you to do that work. And that keeps going as your practice unfolds. So you can see how your relationships are not just the people who give you work, but also what is the team? Who are the team members that you're cultivating and building as you rise in seniority, as you develop more leadership? Now, for some of you, that will be part of what you do on your way to partnership. For some of you, you might have no desire to become a partner and you want to be an independent practitioner. You don't want to have team members. And so that's a choice you can make consciously. If you want team members, then I encourage you to think far ahead and identify the people that you work well with and to build those relationships over the long term. And then finally, still in that category of people, there's the people that you're friends with because this is where I would put mentors. I think we all need to have people that we look up to professionally. And so you can ask yourself who those people are for you. Your firm might assign mentors, and that's a great place to start. There may be other people that you want to cultivate relationships with. So don't feel limited by who people have assigned to you. Again, on that theme of taking ownership, seek out mentors. Figure out what it is that you really want, what type of practice you want to have. Maybe there's a style of practice. Maybe somebody that you know seems to have it all. How do they do it? And you can go to that person and foster a relationship and learn from them. It can be your peers, the people who you chum around with when you're working late on a file and you just want someone to chat with, to banter with, to kind of break up your day and add some spice and some friendliness there. It's maybe people who support you, right? I'm thinking about people like me, people like counselors, people in your family, your friends, people who maybe are not directly involved in your work, but who are there to give you the support you need. So we're getting a little bit further away from the nucleus of your business, more into relationships that are supportive and encouraging and keep you going, motivating. But you might also think about where you're at there, because it may be that if your practice is feeling off and you take a step back and you look at the buckets, you might find that actually this relationship bucket, this people bucket, is kind of empty right now. I don't feel connected to my colleagues. I don't feel connected at work. I feel really isolated. And then you know that this is an area where you can make some improvements. You can take ownership. And I will say before we move on to that last bucket, that I think of the three buckets, this is the one that would be at highest risk for being neglected. Because as a lawyer, you're likely minded toward the skill bucket by nature. Law tends to attract people who are very good students, who are very bright, people who like solving problems, people who are achievement oriented. And so the skills likely come naturally. You see them as important. Writing that beautiful argument, having that excellence of work product, that is probably something that you're already highly attuned to. And the relationship piece might not feel as important. So it really is that student mindset relative to that owner's mindset. So if you think about that as a student, your focus is really on delivering that work product. As a participant in an organization, what you're really focused on is working with your team to receive really good work. You're thinking about that market, that client development, but also collaborating with others in order to serve the greater objective. So in terms of what that means for your second bucket, that idea of developing your relationships. So what that means in terms of developing your relationships, instead of that focal point being simply on the skills, you're also wanting to consider the relationships that you have. So when I work with lawyers, for example, who find that their market has become less robust in their firm, it may be because they haven't been paying as close attention to the relationships they're building as to the quality of the work. And what that can also lead to sometimes is that when it comes time to maybe transition to another organization or look for a new job, they might find that they're really starting from the beginning because they haven't been cultivating relationships throughout. They haven't made that a priority. It's not necessarily billable. It's not something where there's an immediate consequence if they don't do it. And so that's an area where I find sometimes people really put that to the side. And what I'm encouraging you to think about is how you can proactively be building your relationships intentionally so that that aspect of your practice remains robust. So that's bucket number 2 is people. So we want to be thinking about how you are proactively developing relationships with your clients, your internal and external clients, your referral sources, and also building your team, the people who are supporting you in terms of your practice development, and then the categories of people who are really there to mentor you, to support you, and people who you support as well, right? I'm sort of looking at this from the perspective of your growth and development. And of course, you're going to be providing that type of support to others as well. And that brings us to the third bucket in your legal practice. And I've labeled it as time. And time, of course, encapsulates a lot more than just time. This is your time in practice management. And I've already mentioned it in the sense of how it relates to some of the other buckets, in the sense of building trust. So in the relationship bucket, the people bucket, you might find that if your time management is really good, people can depend on you. They know that you're going to deliver on time and they trust you. Then chances are that's an area where you're actually fostering a better connection. And that leads likely to more work, which means you're also improving your skills. So it goes in this positive spiral. And conversely, if what you find is that your practice is not adequately managed and you're not able to use your time in a way that allows you to meet your goals, then what you might find there is that the opposite happens. People find it's difficult to work with you because they don't know if you're going to meet the deadline. They don't know if they're going to have their needs met. And so that can have a cooling off effect. So if you look at the 3 buckets in relation to each other, you've got the skills bucket. And so if you've got the skills, and then you've got the market, you've got the people who are asking you for your help, then what you end up with is workflow. And when you have workflow, you need to manage that workflow. And so that's where the time bucket comes into play. How are you managing your time? How are you managing your practice? Now, again, if we look at this over the long term, right? We look at this from you as a beginning lawyer to a more advanced lawyer, the way you spend your time is going to shift. So at the very beginning, you're really focused on your deliverables, right? You're focused on learning how to produce a quality work product on a timeline. You're learning how to balance multiple timelines. You're learning how to work on projects where you're part of a team. People are depending on you to do certain things. And so your timeliness has a real impact on others. And so your time management really matters. And you want also to be thinking about how your time is going to evolve over the course of your practice. So as you become more of a leader and you build that team that we talked about in bucket 2, other people are going to be producing deliverables for you that ultimately are going to the service that you're providing to your client. Now you're also managing teams. You're managing other people. You're managing their timelines. And so this idea of time and practice management is one that evolves as your practice evolves. And it relates to these other 2 buckets because if you don't have the work, there's nothing really to manage. You don't need to manage your time. And if you don't have the relationships, of course, you don't have the work. And to have those relationships, you want to be delivering on time. You want to be establishing trust. You want your communication to be adequate, to be trust building with the people that you work with. So that third and final category, of course, is time management. And for those of you who are familiar with the podcast, I've done lots of episodes about time and practice management for lawyers because it is an area where many lawyers really struggle, and for good reason. There's a high volume of work. There's unpredictable workflows. Sometimes there's high demand for what you have to offer. Sometimes there's no demand. And so in the busy periods, usually people don't have too much trouble being motivated. They might have trouble prioritizing, getting everything done on time. And then during the slow times, that's when people can also feel a lot of stress, right? That's like, ooh, how is my market doing? Why do I not have more of a workflow? So you can see how all these different factors relate to each other. And so if you're struggling in your practice, then you might look at each of these three buckets and be saying to yourself, okay, how am I doing each of these buckets? And when it comes to time and practice management, are you where you want to be in relation to your practice? So if you're thinking about this from a legal development, professional development standpoint, your practice is going to evolve from one of primarily the doer of other people's instructions, other people's requests, to taking more of an ownership over your practice, having more control. You're going to find you want to structure your goals more proactively. You want to be carving out time for things like business development. You want to be carving out time for your life. Time management isn't just about getting your work done. It's also about getting your work done in a way that feels sustainable, right? If you're like me and you've got a family, then chances are, and by family, I mean kids that you're responsible for, that means you're probably managing your work, your professional time, along with what you need to do, what you choose to do for your family. And so time becomes this thing where you're now trying to figure out, okay, how do I do things in a way where I get to accomplish all the goals you have for yourself? And are you doing that in a way that allows you to sustain a life that you want to have? So just stepping back then, we've covered the three buckets. We've talked about the skills bucket, and I'd asked you to self-assess where you're at in terms of the skills bucket. I didn't do that after we talked about the relationship bucket. So let's do that now. I would encourage you to think about your relationships, the people in your life. And if you think about your workflow, who are the lawyers that are your referral sources, whether these are your direct clients because they're the people that you're working for within your firm, or maybe these are referral sources outside of your firm, your sort of end user external clients, the people who are retaining you. Where are you in that domain? Are you where you want to be? Are there patterns that you notice in terms of clients that you work with where you think, this is the type of client that I really love working with? It seems like there's a good synergy here and I want to do more of that work, in which case you might start thinking about how you want to develop more of those relationships. You may find that there are relationships that aren't working out so well, and maybe you want to find ways to move away from those relationships and into ones that feel better, that feel more sustainable, that are more in the direction of the practice you want to go in. You might also look at your supports, right? Or the people who are on your team, are the people that you're working with who are supporting you. Do you have what you need, right? If you find you're really strapped in the time management department, are there things on your plate right now where you could start delegating that to others and free up some of your time? And in so doing, help others develop skills that will pull them up the learning curve, and also relationships that you can use to support yourself as your practice unfolds. So how are you there? And also your personal relationships. Are you feeling connected enough to the people outside of the office that your life feels balanced, right? You feel fulfilled. You feel like you're not sacrificing everything outside of work in order to have that professional success, because that can work in periods, it can work in stages, but for a lot of us, it's not going to be enough. We're willing to put our social lives on the back burner for periods, but ultimately we might want more from life, from the relationships in our life. We want to preserve and nurture people outside of work. So, we're not necessarily living to work, we're working to live. So you might want to think about where you're at. And chances are, if your practice feels unbalanced, maybe there's a problem there in the people department. If it's feeling really good, it might also be noticing, okay, what is it that I'm doing right now? Who am I working with where I really feel this sense of fulfillment? I feel really excited. And again, focus on those relationships. And then finally, that third bucket. So if you do a self-assessment when it comes to time, this is something that I find is super effective with the lawyers that I work with. When you look at what you want to be doing, and this is in your practice and your life generally, so many of us have ideas and goals and values and the things that we notionally want to make a priority. And then when we think about what those things are, and then we look at our calendars, there's a big gap between what we want to be doing with our time and what we are actually doing with our time. And so if you can audit yourself, you can look at how you spent your day yesterday, how you spent your last week, and evaluate where you're at. Are there things on that list where you think that just didn't make any sense? That was so out of alignment. I can easily get rid of that. Then let those things go, right? Those are the easy ones. Where it gets harder is where you've got really prized values that are competing for your time, and you have to start making decisions over which of the things you care about the most, and how you can recalibrate things so that you're letting things go, so that you're focusing on the things that really matter. Are you finding ways to work with others to amplify your time? Maybe it's using technology, maybe it's using strategies to plan and schedule that are more effective. A lot of lawyers lose time on distractions, procrastination, inefficient planning. Are you planning around your energy cycles? I think this is a great way where you can leverage your time without changing too much. It could be the sequence of the way that you do things. It could be the way you're dealing with emails, right? Are you time blocking your emails, etc.? So when it comes to time, I think a real honest evaluation of what your overall balance looks like is a great starting point. And then getting into the nitty-gritty of what are you doing day to day, and what changes might you want to make in order to have greater alignment between what you want to do and what you're doing. And of course, if we're tying this back to taking ownership over your practice, taking ownership over your time, that is a skill that is a lifelong practice, and one that will serve you. The more you take ownership over your time, the more you're going to be able to focus on the skills that you want to build, the relationships that you want to nurture. And the more you do that, of course, the more in alignment you are, the happier you are, the more successful your practice becomes, and it all builds on itself. So you have very patiently and hopefully with high engagement come through this episode with me to really look at each of the practice pillars that make up your practice. And again, going back to what I said at the beginning, if you've got a firm that has a checklist for you, I encourage you to think about how each of the checklist items fits in relation to this framework, because my guess is that you'll be able to see which of these main buckets that checklist item falls into. And again, the idea behind the buckets is not to make your life more complicated. The idea is to make it simple. Think about the skills, think about the people, think about your time. And if you can come back to those three elements at periods of growth, if you're feeling like you're on a plateau and you're ready to up level, take a look at those three buckets and you'll see opportunities. If you're at a point where you're really struggling, chances are there's something going on in one of those buckets. If it's time management, maybe there's some things there that we can fix. If it's skills development, maybe there's some proactive things that you can do to shift the skills that you're developing. If it's people, maybe something can be done there in terms of taking ownership over your relationships and where you're cultivating your workflow, who you have in your professional network, etc. So it's a really easy shorthand. And what you can do is take it as the three main elements. If you don't have a firm that has a checklist, then you've got full discretion, really, to look at those three buckets, see how it aligns with your work environment, whatever that is, and then develop checklists for yourself, develop goals for yourself within each of those categories. And again, the idea is to simplify so that when you're feeling off, you can look at those categories and in a very strategic and focused way, evaluate where you're at and what you want to do moving forward. So I hope you have enjoyed this episode. I have really enjoyed sharing it with you, and I would invite you to come back to this episode if you need a refresher. If you've got lawyers you work with who you think could benefit from having this framework, then please share it with them. And if you want help to develop your own strategy, right? If you're thinking about your practice and you think, I could really use support in one of these three areas, by all means, let's have a chat, because I would love to help you to figure out what each of these buckets means to you and how you can set yourself up for success in your practice. So with that, I wish you a fabulous week and look forward to reconnecting again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.